Amazon and Surya. Wow.
Okay, sir. I will just call him, sir.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. We can see, sir.
Hmm. Okay, anyway, Nikhil. Hello, Nikhil. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's all right. We'll Amazon and Surya are not there. Forget it. We'll proceed now. Just we want 2 or 3 volunteers to come forward. Who will answer questions? Come on, 55 people in the meeting and nobody is coming forward.
Sir, here's Saurabh Kapadia, sir, from Mumbai.
Okay, so who else?
Sir, Arun, sir, from Bangalore.
Arun from Bangalore. Okay, so we got Saurabh and Arun. Anybody else wants to volunteer? One more. Saurabh, Arun, and I mean that is just to so that during the talk we won't waste time trying to find who will answer. That's why we identify 2-3 people right in the beginning. Okay, Arun and Saurav we have got for the time being. We guys have your mic on mute, but whenever you want to, and I ask you something, just put the mic on and talk to me. Okay? Right.
Sure, sir.
Right. So we'll start today. We are going to talk. I was told that you have a 40-mark session in practical on cardiac procedures, where you will be asked to demonstrate cardiac procedures, and I don't know what procedures you will be asked, but then the common ones we'll try and cover in this thing, which I thought these are the common things which we don't discuss too often. We assume that everybody knows cardiopulmonary resuscitation and cardiac defibrillation. And of course, these vagal maneuvers, Valsalva, isometric exercise are always the favorites of the examiner in clinical examination and in case as well as in demonstration. So we'll discuss some of these. At the end, if we have time and you want to ask some about any other procedure, you are most welcome to ask. Okay? Now, ideally, this sort of class should be held in a big classroom with a model in front of us or a volunteer, and some of you do the procedures. I watch what you do, and then I correct you or improve you or correct or tell which points you are correct, where you need some change and all that. Ideally, it should be done face to face in a classroom. Obviously, this is not ideal what we are doing. So I thought cardiopulmonary resuscitation, best to ask somebody to do a CPR on a model, on a mannequin, record it and show me. So I asked my students, Surya and Amazon, to arrange a mannequin and demonstrate. So I'm going to play the video. They have done a CPR. It's a short video. So I want you two guys and also everybody else to watch carefully, because I'll be asking you some questions on that. Okay? Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm playing the video. Yeah, code 99 is the code blue in our hospital. It is the same as code blue. Okay, if it's playing again, I'll play it once more for you. Okay, this is the second round. Okay, that's it. No, that's okay. Right now, who's there? Arun and Saurabh. You want to comment on that? Do you agree with all the steps that were done, or you think you could have done something better? Saurabh.
Yes, sir. Sir, one thing, when the code was being called, the other person was trying to explain. The person was seemed to be a paramedical staff, did not started the CPR himself, and he was just trying to explain the situation to the doctor who first arrives. Instead, he should have started the CPR, and then meanwhile he should have explained if he wanted to explain. And another thing which I noticed, that the number of bags and masks ventilations were given were very quick and very high number. And thirdly, I think the chest compressions were not that fast, and I'm not sure whether they were effective or not.
Okay. Good, very good. I liked all the 3 points. Amudan and Surya are there. It's a good learning point for them. I think I agree with all your 3 points. You did a good message that first of all, the person who's first on the spot, he should raise the alarm, yes. But he should not waste time talking and all that. He should initiate cardiopulmonary resuscitation. At that point, I agree. You said the ventilation was, what did you say, massage, ventilation was too fast, or did you say, what did you say?
Sir, I said second point was the amount of number of breaths which were given by bag and mask ventilation were very high in number.
Very good. So what is the rate you would recommend?
Sir, it's 150s to.
Oh, you must know this, no? We are all supposed to be the MBBS doctors who know CPR. Actually, when you give ventilation and massage by mouth-to-mouth breathing, the ratio is supposed to be 30:2. That is 30 compressions with 2 breaths. But when you use an ambu bag, like you are doing in a hospital, the ambu bag capacity is much more than your mouth. And when you give a full compression of an ambu bag, it's very good. Actually, you don't need to give more than 20 to 25 breaths with an ambu bag. So if you hyperventilate, what is the problem?
You're washing out the CO2 and the further the drive to respiration is lost.
Okay, sure. So you don't want alkalosis, respiratory alkalosis. So 2 mistakes. One, the first responder did not start CPR. Second is the ventilation. The ventilation was far too rapid. Thirdly, what did you say about cardiac massage?
Sir, I found that it was slow and it was not that effective in terms because it was.
What do you mean by effective? You're right, but can you explain it a little more?
Sir, if you want to give massage, it should be at least 100 to 120 per minute. Should be that fast.
Yes.
And the effective depression which it causes should be around at least 3 to 5.
3 to 5 what?
mm.
Centimeters.
Centimeters. That is 1 inch. Come on, guys. These are all things you see. This is the problem. We think CPR is simple. Obviously, people have not practiced enough. You have to. I'll show you how much it is. No? 2 to 4 inches, not centimeters. You have to press the lower half of the sternum to at least half the diameter of the chest. Only then the heart will be compressed. 2.5 inches average, 2 to 4 inches is the amount of. Now, by the way, I think you got it wrong. He was massaging at more than 100 per minute. In fact, I thought he was massaging too rapidly. But he was not doing it seriously. He was not compressing the chest at all. He was just acting as if he is compressing. He was not pressing the chest at all. So these are the 3 points you made. I agree with you. Effective cardiopulmonary massage was not done. Okay, any other point you would like to comment? Anybody?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, the leads are not connected. I mean,
very good.
Connected.
Very good. Yes. They said I'm collecting the leads. They never connected the ECG leads. I never saw them connected the lead. So look, a drill is a drill, but the drill you have to connect the lead because that saves that uses time when you're doing a real life CPR. They never connected the monitor. Secondly, they never opened the chest. They have not taken the shirt off. Guys, you don't even notice. Don't you expose the chest in when you're doing a cardiopulmonary resuscitation? How will you connect the monitor? How will you give a DC shock if you have to give a DC shock? Is that the way to do resuscitation without exposing the chest? Then, did you see how they gave ambu bag ventilation? Ambu bag ventilation, do you give with air or do you give with oxygen?
Oxygen.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Who is that?
They were to give it
So
oxygen,
the last
but
sentence we didn't hear.
Huh? So they never connected oxygen to the ambu bag. Now once again I want to check, is Amud and Surya there? I'm not a criticism, they should also learn. See, the guys, don't think they took the great effort of doing this and recording it for me. So I think we should give them all a big clap. But it's also my duty to point out the faults in the procedure by which they learn and they become better cardiologists. So Amudan and Surya, if you are there, please come forward. Don't worry. Everybody makes mistakes. Even I make mistakes. So nothing wrong in making mistakes, and you must learn what differently. Now, so the mistakes I find is you didn't expose the chest. You haven't put a board behind the patient. The patient is lying on a spring bed. Can you give a cardiac massage on a spring bed?
No, sir. We need a hard surface where we can give.
So one of the first things you do in cardiopulmonary resuscitation is to get the patient on a hard surface. Every CCU should have a hard board so that the moment the patient arrives, we put the hard board behind the patient. If you cannot get a hard bed, what do you do next? The next best is the floor.
Floor.
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, when you are out of hospital cardiac arrest, the floor is the best. Mother Earth is the best place for pulmonary resuscitation. Okay. Now, then I heard adrenaline dose being given. One thing I appreciate is Surya shouted out the instructions very clearly for everyone. Normally in resuscitation, everybody is running here and there, and everybody is confused and all that. But this time I heard his instruction given, give 1 in 10,000 adrenaline, he said. But he didn't tell me how much to give. He said first dose of adrenaline 1 in 10,000. How much? I give the whole syringe of 10 ml or I give 20 ml? How much do I give? Yes, Saurabh, how much do you give adrenaline?
So 1 mg we have to give.
Huh?
1 mg per 1 ml it is there, sir. So 1 mg in 9 ml we have to dilute and give it.
Okay, so 1 mg total adrenaline we have to give, but for intravenous use it has to be 1 in 10,000 dilution.
So
Right.
full 10 ml we have to give, sir.
Yes, but you must be aware of it. No? Okay, so this is one. Then how often is adrenaline repeated?
Maybe it's a 3 to 5 minutes.
3 to 5
Three
minutes.
to-
Every 3 to
minutes.
5 minutes.
This whole video is only 50 seconds, but they repeated a second dose of adrenaline, but that's okay because I think they wanted to, they shouted out, is it already 3 minutes, and then they gave, probably they wanted to keep the video short, that I agree. So I think you must pay attention to small things. See, the demonstration of a practical procedure in examination means if I am the examiner, I will be watching for every little mistake that you are doing. Now, first of all, so they said arrest is in the OPD. But it doesn't look like an OPD. No, patient is very well laid out in a bed. They got a defibrillator, ambu bag, everything readily laid out and all. It doesn't look like a OPD at all. Now, tell me one thing. If the patient was sitting in the OPD, what would you do? What was the first thing you would do? You were sitting in the OPD in the middle of another 30 people.
Taking to a
And the
safe
patient-
place. It should be isolated from and taken to a safe place and made to lie on a rigid board or on the floor, and then we have to start the CPR.
Yeah. Arun, what do you feel? This is Arun or Saurabh? Who answers?
Yes.
Yeah. Arun, what do you feel? What will you do? The patient arrests on the OPD.
First, we have
Call
to
for help, sir.
take him. We have to call for help, and we have to start the CPR immediately after placing him in a safe place over a rigid surface.
Did you listen to my question? He is sitting in the OPD, I said. He is
First,
sitting in the
call for
OPD
help.
and becomes non-responsive in the sitting posture. The first thing is to put him on the floor. You don't
Floor.
move him to CCU and all. You don't want to waste 5 minutes trying to get him into CCU. You put him on the floor and start CPR. That is the answer to my question. You don't waste time trying to ask for a trolley and try him to see. You have to start resuscitation on the spot. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, safety is important. If you are on the road, safety is important. I agree. But if you are inside the hospital in the OPD area, you start resuscitation there and then. You don't try to shift the patient to your intensive care. That process may take 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes is enough to damage the brain. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'll play this again. Now let me see whether you find any more deficiencies here. Okay. Any new comments on this video? I played it again for you. The same thing.
So check pulses before starting the CPR, sir.
Pulse, they checked, no? They checked the carotid pulse. Didn't you see? The boy in the blue dress came and checked the carotid pulse and said no carotid. Anything else?
The person should rotate, sir. The person who is doing CPR.
Okay.
Otherwise,
If
they
it
will get
continued,
fatigue.
if it continued more than 2 minutes, it has to be rotated. I agreed. But that's not a very major error. He's still not tired. He's a strong fellow, Amudan, so he can go for another 5 minutes. Anything else? Any other error?
Sir, compression should be followed by abrupt relaxation to see the spontaneous recovery of circulation.
Yes. It has to be compressed.
Responsiveness, sir, mainly because and the breathing pattern, presence of or absence of respiration.
Okay. So now you said 3. Responsiveness, pulse and respiration.
Pulse, if it is in hospital, for general public, it is not recommended. If it is out of hospital arrest, it is not required.
This is a hospital setting, no?
Yes, sir.
You think this is a general public? This is an hospital. So you need examine the pulse, respiration and responsiveness. So do you think he examined the pulse? I saw him.
He only checked the pulse.
Yeah, he checked the pulse. He checked the pulse. He read responsiveness, but I didn't see him. I didn't see him look for respiration. So once pulse is not there, he assumes that the patient is okay. Now can you have unresponsiveness with absent pulse with respiration being present?
Yes, sir.
When?
Patient in shock can have pulse volume may be not palpable due to cardiogenic shock, and patient may be unconsciousness due to shock itself.
Okay. No, or sometimes pulseless VT, which has just started 30 seconds ago, patient may still be breathing, but the pulse will be absent. And the patient has the asystole in cath lab, he is awake, he is breathing, but his pulse is absent. Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So these three are not synonymous with each other. You have to identify each one separately. Secondly, only when all three are there, you declare arrest and code blue. Secondly, what is the first thing you see when you connect them? When you start resuscitation, you started massage, you started the thing, and then you connect the monitor. What do you see?
Rhythm.
The rhythm.
The rhythm.
The
is what?
initial rhythm.
What do you mean by rhythm?
Whether it is a straight line or ventricular tachycardia. Ventricular tachycardia. Sir.
No, I want a better answer.
Shockable or non-shockable?
Very
Shockable
good.
rhythm.
Who said
Shockable.
that? No, wait. Who said that? Shockable, not shock. Huh?
Amit.
All right.
Amit here, sir.
Okay. So the one of the first thing you should look for in cardiopulmonary resuscitation is it doesn't matter with the VT or not. We're not interested in the details of the diagnosis. We only want whether it's a shockable rhythm or a non-shockable rhythm. Understand? Yes or no? Say something.
Yes, sir.
You
Yes,
have to
sir.
see the first thing before you do anything, before you give even adrenaline, you have to check whether it's a shockable rhythm or a non-shockable rhythm. Example of shockable rhythm are VT and VF. Example of non-shockable rhythm are cardiac asystole. If it is VT and VF, what is the treatment?
Sir, DC shock is the treatment. If it is VT, synchronized DC cardioversion. If it is
A patient who is in cardiac arrest situation with a pulseless VT, you will give synchronized DC shock. And okay. And what about the asystole? What will you do?
Asystole, CPR, adrenaline, sir.
Adrenaline. So you don't give it. So did they look for shockable versus non-shockable?
It to look for, not it seen, sir.
Okay. Then that's an error, no? If you didn't point it out, that means you are also wrong. Not only they miss, you have also missed. See, only after giving adrenaline, they are asking what is the rhythm. They are not looking at the rhythm yet. Monitor connected. Look, he is giving adrenaline before noting the rhythm. Did you notice that?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So without seeing whether it's a shockable rhythm or non-shockable rhythm, adrenaline is not the. If it is shockable, I think a defib will cure him immediately. So that's another major error. Okay. Then cardiac massage you already said. So like this, when you demonstrate in front of the examiner, these are all small things which make a huge difference in the survival of the patient. Now I think you better make a note of all these small things and do some practice before you go to exam. Okay. So I'll go to the next slide now. Let's see. So when you are called to see a collapsed patient, the first thing to call him, shake him, and see whether he is rousable. The next thing is to check. Now the other thing they didn't do is extend the jaw, extend the neck. To avoid any airway obstruction or tongue falling back, have you seen the anesthetist always put the jaw upwards and extend the neck to open up the airway? So you are supposed to extend the neck and either listen for breathing or feel for breathing or look for breathing, whatever it is. Is there respiration? And of course, check the pulse. Now all these three have to be done simultaneously. It's not as if one by one you take 10 minutes to do it. All these things should be done within a matter of 3 seconds. You don't waste time doing it. If you are a trained person, you should learn to do this in 2 to 3 seconds, all of it together. When all three are not there, no pulse, no breathing and no response, it is a sign of man down. And once you have felt that all three are not responsive, you declare cardiac arrest. You got it? Now this should have been the first response of the people attending this patient. Now the initial few steps is also called basic life support. I don't know how many of you have done basic life support and ACLS training. Do you guys go for it?
Yes, sir.
Why don't you just raise hands in the group? Let me know how many of you have done actually BLS and ACLS training. Later on, I will have a look at that. Just raise your hands in that group. Okay. So the initial BLS steps are taught to all nurses, all technicians, all laypersons, and of course, the doctors also need to know about basic life support. The most important is the cardiac arrest can happen in any area. It can happen in the CCU, it can happen in the OPD, it can happen in the middle of the road. It can happen in the office room. Of course, it's very important to make the area clear and make sure it is safe. If it is in the road and you start doing CPR in the middle of the road, it's likely that most of you will be hit by the next bus which comes on that road. So you have to choose a clear and a safe area. This applies to only out of hospital cardiac arrest. It's important to make the patient flat. Never attempt resuscitation in the sitting posture. I've seen some people try to do massage in the sitting posture. That's a sure shot sign of failure. Patient has to be flat on a hard surface. You have to open up his clothes. You cannot do cardiac resuscitation in a patient who is fully dressed. Check again the pulses, shout for help. All this should take only less than 30 seconds, not more than that. Why is time important? You know that the brain tolerates hypoxia for less than 5 minutes. Heart and kidney may withstand hypoxia for much longer. The brain doesn't withstand hypoxia. So you start compression. And I will come to rescue breath later. And you continue basic life support until the advanced team comes and takes over. Now this is for out of hospital arrest or a nurse attending an arrest before the doctor has arrived and before the advanced cardiopulmonary resuscitation comes and takes over. The sequence in resuscitation, remember, is always first attention to circulation, second airway, and third is breathing. This is not for diagnosis, I am talking about treatment. The first attention is to establishment of blood flow to the brain, and therefore that takes priority over giving artificial ventilation to the patient. Therefore, the first thing is to start cardiac massage before you do anything. The first person on the spot starts cardiac massage. He does not waste time trying to give ambu bag. He does not waste time trying to get an IV line and all that. He does not even try to get a defibrillator. He just starts cardiac massage and continues to do that. The second thing he does is, it's not this person. A second person has to do. The first person doing massage has to do only massage. And he should not stop massage even for a few seconds anywhere, anytime. The second person to arrive is to look at the airway. Make sure there is no foreign body, no aspiration, no food in the throat. So make sure the airway is clear. One of the most common causes of arrest in out of hospital is foreign bodies and aspiration. And if there is a foreign body or an aspiration and you try to give ambu bag ventilation, it's a total waste of time. And then you must start artificial ventilation. So remember this series. Earlier it used to be ABC, but now of late the sequence is always C first, A, examine the airway and start artificial respiration. I think that sequence these people followed. They did massage before they started, but they didn't examine the airway, whether there was any foreign body or aspirated material in the throat. They didn't look for it. Now, the method of compression needs a lot of improvement. Now, in the next few slides, I will show you how to do compression. Most important, the site of compression. It is done on the lower half of the sternum. The upper half of the sternum is very, very stiff, so you cannot compress it down. The lower half of the sternum is more flexible. That is where you place one hand and place the second hand on top of it. You need two hands and you have to interlock your finger, because cardiopulmonary massage, if you do properly, is a very heavy work. You need a lot of strength. Many people cannot do it easily. Therefore, you need two hands and full strength. Interlock your finger and compress the chest up towards the spine up to a depth of 4 to 5 centimeters, that is 2 to 4 inches. 2 to 4 inches. You have to press 2 to 4 inches and allow it to come back fully before you start compressing again. It should be done at a rate of approximately 100 per minute. Okay? If you do it properly, it's a very tiring job. And therefore, you need a person changing CPR hand every 2 minutes. Okay? I think the cardiac massage which was done in this video was not adequate. I'll show you how it is done properly later. Okay. Now the important thing is you need a lot of strength. Not everybody is so strong. You need your whole body weight to help you in massage. So the proper thing is it's best to kneel down on your knee by the side of the patient so that you can put your whole body weight on your upper limb. And your upper limb has to be absolutely straight. It should not be bent at the elbow. It has to be absolutely straight. Look the frontal view, and this is the lateral view. And note how where it is kept. It neither in the epigastrium nor in the upper part of the sternum. Two hands locked together, both the arms absolutely straight, and the entire body weight contributing to the force. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Compression is active, relaxation is passive. Down, up, down, up, down, up. Ideally, this person should count 1, 2, 3, 4 for every compression. Did you understand? Did you understand?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let us see how it is ideally done. This is a recording from Medscape. Let us look how it is ideally done. This is how a cardiac massage is. Look at the way he's holding his hands on the lower half of the sternum. The two hands are interlocked, and look at the way it is done. Oops, sorry. Okay. Now, did you notice the DC, the ECG, the electrode for the defibrillation is placed by another person. This person doesn't stop his cardiac massage for placing the defibrillator. But there is a thing, this patient appears to be on a spring bed. Can you see the whole body of the patient is going up and down? Now that's not ideal. If I had my choice, I would place a hard board behind him so that the compression is more effective. But this video clearly shows how to do cardiac massage. And look at this person's elbow. Elbow is absolutely straight. The entire body weight is contributing to the force compressing the chest. Okay, now cardiopulmonary resuscitation cannot be done alone. If you are in the hospital, you always have some help, and usually, in fact, you have too many help. When there is a cardiac arrest call, no, everybody is standing anywhere in the hospital will come running there. So eventually, you will have about 20 people in that room. There will be no room for anybody to work, and there will be a lot of confusion. So I think one person should take charge as a leader and give clear instructions. And all the people who are not doing anything useful should leave the room. That's ideal. Now, so the first person to arrive on the spot, the leader had to allot responsibility to different people for efficient cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The first person, usually it's a paramedical person, would recognize cardiac arrest, he would raise the alarm, and he would start cardiac compression. The paramedical person has to start cardiac compression. The second person is usually the doctor, and I assume that he will take the charge of the lead as a leader. He will again look at the breath, he will diagnose confirmed cardiac arrest, and he will issue all instructions. Usually he will also be the person who takes charge of the airway, oxygen and airway and ambu bag. If we are lucky enough to get an anesthetist in time, that will be the third person who will take charge of ventilation. Until then, the leader will take care of the airway, oxygen and ambu bag and give all necessary instructions. Now, mind you, there's no use doing ambu bag ventilation if you don't connect oxygen. And this will be considered as a major error if you don't connect it. Okay. And then you need, once this person is doing compression and this person is doing ventilation and instruction, they cannot leave this job for anything else. And therefore you need a third person to connect monitors, to get IV access, to load drugs and to give injection, and to get other equipment like suction if there is a aspiration or vomiting, and to get the defibrillator and operate the defibrillator. Now these are not the people who are supposed to operate defibrillator. They are supposed to continue with their job. Got it? Now, if you have more people, generally it's more confusion and it doesn't help. A fourth person can be an anesthetist because he can take charge of the intubation and ventilation. A fifth person, if he is available, can be sent to talk to the patient's family and find out the background, because we don't know why the patient arrested. He has just come into the casualty arrested. So we can go and talk to the family, what has happened, what symptom did he have at home, did he have a chest pain, was he taking any medication, did he have any operation recently, whatever it is. So if you have additional people, you make use of it. And who decides what use? The leader has to allot responsibility. We don't want all 5-6 people to stand there and watch the fun. We only want one person for compression, one person for ventilation, one person to handle these things, and 1 or 2 more people to do odd jobs and to relieve the person who is doing cardiac compression. Understood? Hello?
Yes, sir.
As a cardiologist attending cardiac arrest, it is your job to take the leadership. So you will be doing this job, giving instructions and managing respiration till the anesthetist comes, but supervising everything else. That means you have to give clear, loud instructions about drugs and drug doses, what drug to be given, how much to be given. Others can, if any other extra person is there, they can substitute for cardiac compression every 2 minutes. One of the most important things to remember, under no circumstances cardiac massage has to be interrupted. Nothing should stop the cardiac massage. Although we say it regularly, it happens, every cardiac arrest this happens. The person will stop massage and talk to somebody, the person will shout, can you get this, can you get this, can you adjust that lead for me, and the cardiac massage will stop. Now, the same thing is different if you are in an out of hospital cardiac arrest. The first person is always a lay person. He will find the person collapse and he will shout, that's all he will do. And then you are all alone. You are the leader and you are also the person executing the job. There's nobody else to assist you. There, you quickly confirm the arrest, make sure that your area is safe, that you're not in a dangerous area. Of course, outside you will be on a hard surface. You shout, to tell this fellow to go and call an ambulance. That's the only thing he can do. He can call for ambulance. That you instruct to call for ambulance. Quickly check the airway for any foreign bodies and cardiac massage. You do cardiac massage at 100 per minute. You can do cardiac massage alone, or you can do cardiac massage with mouth-to-mouth breathing. Now I'll come to this aspect a little later. Usually the ratio is 30 compression to 2 breaths, 30 compression, 2 breaths, and then again 30 compression and again 2 breaths. It's a very, very tiring job, but the only way to keep the patient alive is you have to continue till the advanced resuscitation team or the ambulance arrives. Now the current evidence is you probably can do cardiac compression alone and really no need to give breath, because when you do a chest compression for cardiac massage, you are also compressing the lung and you are also pushing air out of the lung, and when you release it, the air comes back into the lung. Therefore, you indeed are doing some little ventilation. And secondly, if you are a single person doing cardiac massage and ventilation, it's not possible for you to continue for a very long time. And therefore, the American Heart and other societies now are recommending generally that if you do not have people to assist you, just do cardiac compression and don't worry about artificial ventilation. Okay, just compression at 100, 120 per minute will take care of both circulation and air movement. Now, this is the ACLS protocol. It's a circular diagram because you keep doing it till the patient wakes up or he is certified dead. The first thing is start compression. That is the first thing you do. Then, of course, you attach oxygen and attach a monitor defibrillator. And first thing is to see whether it's a shockable rhythm or a non-shockable rhythm. If it is a shockable rhythm, give a shock and correct it. If it is not a shockable rhythm, you continue CPR, and continue the CPR. You need an IV access, adrenaline repeated 1 milligram every 3 to 5 minutes. Okay. Now, earlier a number of other drugs used to be given during cardiac arrest, calcium chloride and this thing, soda bicarbonate and vasopressic agents and other things. Nowadays, the protocol is very simplified. Although drugs have absolutely no advantage in the acute phase of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The only drug to be given in cardiopulmonary resuscitation is adrenaline. The only additional drug you may be used in a patient you having recurrent VF and VT. For example, you give a shock, he recovers and immediately VT comes back. Again, you give a shock, it recovers for a few minutes and again it comes back. A recurrent VF and VT, you can give bolus or rapid loading of amiodarone 300 milligram. So, current management of ACLS, advanced cardiac life support, is only 2 drugs are used. Adrenaline every 3 to 5 minutes, 1 milligram, and amiodarone if the patient is having refractory VF or VT. All other drugs are used only later on if necessary. You continue massage, and of course your massage has to be of proper quality. If ineffective massage, you may as well not do it. Okay. Now, somewhere at this stage, you have to look for any treatable causes. There are some causes of cardiac collapse which can be treated, and the patient may improve if you correct it. And what are those? We'll come to that later. You continue that every 2 minutes, again check for rhythm, see if it is shockable, not shockable, give adrenaline, again continue CPR. Again check rhythm, shockable, not shockable, give adrenaline, continue rhythm. That goes round and round and round, till you decide it no longer worth continuing or the patient recovers to stable rhythm. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Now, what are the correctable factors you should look for? Now, these are some factors which can be easily corrected, but if you don't correct them, the patient will not come out of cardiac arrest. And they are categorized into two. Sorry? Hello? Anything? Okay. Correctable.
Clear, sir.
Okay. Correctable factors are divided into all these start with H and all these start with T. So to easy to remember, hypovolemia, hypoxia, acidosis, excess of hydrogen ion, hypothermia, hypokalemia, hyperkalemia. Think of all these causes whenever cardiac arrest is getting prolonged and not reviving. Hypovolemia, you can just give blindly some volume also, no harm done. Correct hypoxia by proper ventilation and oxygen. Check blood gas, if he is not recovering within a few 5 to 8 minutes of resuscitation, check the blood gas. Hypothermia, check whether he was in water. Hypokalemia, hyperkalemia. Check whether there is a background, whether he was on diuretic, whether he has a history of renal failure. Then tension pneumothorax, cardiac tamponade. These conditions will not respond to cardiac massage. Ask for the history, pulmonary thromboembolism, coronary thrombosis, and intake of any poison. Okay, correctable factors. Meanwhile, you continue doing cardiac massage. When the third person should be doing. The massaging person and the ventilation person should be continuing their job, but the leader should give instruction for the third person to somehow exclude all these conditions. Now, what about mouth-to-mouth rescue breaths? You must know how to do it, although many people don't do it. In the hospital setting, you always use the ambu bag. in the outside setting, now the recommendation is to do cardiac massage alone. But in case you want to do it, you must know the method. You have to extend the jaw, extend the neck so that the airway is open. Look at the way you hold the chin and push upwards. This very important when you do ventilatory management. Lift the chin up like this and then pinch the nose of the patient, close the nose of the patient tightly so that the air does not escape through the nose, and blow air into the mouth. Now, if you want to put the mouth directly on the patient's mouth, you could have a handkerchief or a tissue or a gauze piece in the way. That could also be done. There's no problem. Air will go through the gauze piece. You blow air for about a second and then allow the chest to come back passively for the air to come out. And the ratio is, after every 30 compressions of the heart, you give 2 rescue breaths. Now this is easily done if there are 2 people, one person doing massage and one person doing ventilation. It can be easily done. But one person doing both is rather a tough job. Okay, once
Sir,
the patient,
sir, one doubt I
So you
had,
have to continue,
in this,
sir.
Sorry?
this
sorry, say that?
Sir,
I can't hear.
chest compressions we should continue, sir, while giving breathing also 2 breaths.
No. If you are doing one person doing it, you can't continue. You have to interrupt it.
2 persons.
Yeah, it's only in 2 persons that you can do. In that case, you don't interrupt. No, you don't interrupt.
yeah, in case of 2 people doing.
No, you don't interrupt. You don't interrupt cardiac massage for either mouth-to-mouth ventilation, and you don't interrupt it for ambu bag ventilation also.
So one person will be giving breathing and one will be giving chest compression simultaneously.
Correct. They don't have to stop for each other.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So once the patient...
Sir, how frequently you have to check pulse, sir, carotid pulse?
I told you, no, every 2 minutes. 2 minutes, don't stop anything. Of course, ECG is already connected. The ECG will be going continuously. But you don't
also
stop.
You should check.
No. Without ECG, you won't get a pulse, no? Is there any way you can get a pulse without ECG?
No, sir, if ECG is not there.
No, if the ECG comes back and then you look for the pulse. Otherwise, every 2 minutes you can stop and because sometimes cardiac massage, the ECG will be very disturbed. So once in 2 minutes, just stop for a few seconds and look at the monitor, and at the same time look for the pulse. Just
then
few
cardiac
seconds.
compressions. Then we should stop.
Few seconds, because that will have to be done. Few seconds. Okay, once the patient recovers BP and pulse, you have to put him in a recovery position. Do you know what is the recovery position?
Left lateral position.
Any lateral, not necessarily left. Have you seen the patient after anesthesia, how the anesthetist put their patient? They always put the patient in one lateral position with a head down, and so that any secretions, any foreign body from the stomach or anything comes down, it won't go into the lung. But the neurological and even post-cardiac anesthesia, post-anesthesia, post-cardiac arrest recovery position, you put the patient in a recovery position. Don't put the patient in flat on his back and leave him after cardiac arrest. Okay. Now let's go a little more deep into the process of defibrillation. Now this is another video. Amudan and Surya have kindly recorded this also for us. I think we should thank them because they've taken a lot of effort. They came, I think, late last night and recorded it. Okay, I'm going to play the video. Saurabh and Arun are watching it. You're going to comment on the procedure of defibrillation, okay? So this same patient having a cardiac arrest and they want to defibrillate. Now wait, look at Surya, look what the cardiac massage is doing. The posture is completely wrong. His elbow is flexed. He's not using his body weight to do cardiac massage. You got it? And his frequency is much more than 120. Just watch again. Anyway, this video is for actually defib, but I thought I'll just comment on the cardiac massage there. Look, it's a very half-hearted massage. Okay, look, and then I want you to come. Right, you want me to play it again?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Arun, what's your comment now?
Sir, whether ECG, it doesn't look like connected to ECG to before giving the shock, they should have continuous ECG monitoring.
Okay, that we already discussed. No, that we already discussed. No, this is the same patient, and I agreed. ECG should have been connected. So agreed. But yeah. Then what else?
So the person who is doing the CPR.
Let him finish. Arun's turn.
Then that is one thing. Then secondly, shock should be shock was given, and then he continued with CPR.
I didn't understand.
After giving the shock,
I didn't understand.
after giving the shock, the ECG has to be again seen, sir, properly. I don't think they saw that.
What else? Anything else?
Then application of jelly and other things.
Well, he did say, "Have you applied jelly?" Then the nurse said yes.
Okay.
Do you heard what strength shock he gave?
No, sir, it was not visible.
How much strength would you give?
If it is a biphasic, 100 joules. If it is at least 100 joules. If it is
no. You're going to tell the nurse you give at least 100, but it is your choice. You can decide. You can give 1,000 also. That's
200 joules monophasic.
That's what. That's
200 joules monophasic or 3.
You have to give clear instruction. Don't say at least and all. What is the shock you will give? That's my question. Again, answer.
200 joules monophasic.
200 joules monophasic.
Yes, sir.
You'll choose monophasic switch on the defibrillator.
No, sir. But depending upon the whatever is available. If it is a monophasic machine, then we have to give 200. If it is a biphasic machine, then we have to give 100.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, Saurav can answer now. Yes, Saurav. Any other comment?
So the person giving the massage only was giving the shock rather than the other person. I think there was too much time delay in transferring those shock pads to
I told you, the person doing massage should not interrupt it. It should be the third person arranging defibrillator and giving the shock. The person doing massage should continue until they are ready to give the shock and then only take out the hand. Here, the massage person is stopping, he is giving instructions, he is taking the paddle, asking for jelly, and then he is putting the pedal defibrillator, then he is handing back the paddle, and then starting massage. That is wrong. Anything else? Anything else? Did you notice?
So the pads are different for the apical and the sternal area, so whether they are properly placed or not.
Yeah, what do you mean properly? You tell me how to place it, no? Don't say not properly, you tell me how you will do it. You're not happy with that paddle position, that's what you're telling? Or you're not happy with that paddle itself?
No, I'm not sure whether that paddle are being placed at apical or parietal.
Okay, good. That's an important point. That's an important point. Did you? First question is cardiac arrest and defibrillation. The patient has to be fully undressed. the shirt has to be removed. No compromises on that. Now, where do you want to place the paddle ideally for defibrillation? Saurabh?
One is at the parasternal region, another is at the apical region.
Parasternal region, I know two parasternal, left parasternal region, right parasternal region, I know upper parasternal region, I know lower parasternal region. Don't give me incomplete answers.
The lower left parasternal region.
Lower left parasternal. And the other paddle?
On the apical region.
No, you're wrong. Arun?
Sir, the first paddle is in the upper right parasternal area, and the other one is at the apex.
No,
Upper right.
You're not absolutely correct. Anybody else want to answer?
Sir, one paddle is over the sternum and the second one is at the apex.
Wrong. Anybody else?
Right infraclavicular.
Right of sternum, just below the clavicles.
Okay, who said that? Who said that? You're right. Okay, right infraclavicular region. And the next other paddle?
At the
apex, sir.
How do you know where the apex is? How do you know where the apex is? It may be in the fifth intercostal space midclavicular line. It may also be in the posterior axillary line.
We have to give along the anterior axillary line.
Look. I think you must understand what is the principle of defibrillation. The principle of defibrillation gives a shock right through the heart. The entire heart should be between the two paddles. The heart should be between the two paddles. So ideally, the proper position for defibrillation is one paddle on the front of the chest and one paddle on the back of the chest, like you do in the EP lab. I don't know if some of you have worked in the EP lab. They give one defib pad on the front and one EP pad on the back, so that they can defibrillate whenever they want. So that is the ideal position. But when a patient is having cardiac massage and resuscitation, it's very difficult to put a patch on the back. Therefore, you have to have as much as the cardiac mass between the two paddles. Therefore, you place it almost near the right shoulder in the right infraclavicular region, not in the parasternal region. And that is exactly what Surya was doing. He was placing it in the parasternal region, which is not correct. You have to place it in the right infraclavicular region, close to the shoulder. The other one has to be in the axilla. It has to be not even in the anterior axillary line, mid-axillary line, so that the heart is in between the two paddles. Get it? Yes or no? Yes. Please place the paddle. Otherwise, you will be failing in your defibrillation and you will be using again and again and again shocks and say that it's not effective. So you have to use adequate shocks and you have to use it in an adequate position. Now, another important thing, did you notice he said everybody clear, everybody? That's not the way the ACLS protocol says. The ACLS protocol wants you to call out, I am clear, are you clear, and is everybody clear? So all 3%, no, I am clear, you are clear, everybody clear. That's the way it is. Okay, you can evolve your own language for your hospital, that doesn't make any difference. But when you clear, you are taking your hands off to avoid a shock. But I saw Amudan put the oxygen mask and the ambu bag right on the patient, near the patient's chest. Is oxygen a inflammable gas or not? Hello?
Inflammable, sir. Yes, sir. Inflammable.
Can you put an ambu bag which is giving oxygen and right next to the chest and give a DC shock there? There will be a spark and the whole CCU will be on fire. The oxygen giving ambu bag should be taken away from the site of ambulation. You should hold it behind your back so that even a small spark doesn't strike the oxygen. Just watch what he is doing. He just drops it, boom, dropped it there, and he taken his hand off. And look at that. the shoulder paddle is very close to that ambu bag. If that ambu bag was connected to oxygen, it is dangerous. You understand?
Yes, sir. Sir, one doubt.
So,
If the patient is intubated, then we don't have to worry, no, sir.
Well, intubated means there will be no leakage. No, but this was an ambu bag, no?
Yes.
And intubated means the oxygen won't leak.
Yes.
Okay. Now, so the errors were he didn't expose the chest, he interrupted his cardiac massage, the placement of the paddle was not correct, he did not clear the patient for DC shock properly, ECG was not connected, and then finally the strength of the shock, he said 360 joules. You agree with that, or you have any other concept on that? You know, he said 100 joules. I think he said biphasic 100 joules and monophasic he said 200 joules. Arun said that. You agree with that, or you don't agree with that? 100 and 200.
So monophasic 360 and biphasic 120 to 200.
I think when you're dealing with a cardiac arrest situation, you don't know the underlying rhythm. So you straight away you go for the maximum shock. You don't try 100, 120 like that and all. In a biphasic, you go straight away for 200, and in a monophasic, you go straight to the maximum of 360 or 400, whatever your machine has it. Okay? So that brings me to the types of shock. Are you aware of the various types of shock? One we know, no, DC shock and AC shock.
Yes, sir.
Like, you know, but current can be of various types. Which one do you want to use? No? AC current or DC current?
DC shock.
DC current.
Why not AC? Look simple, no? All these questions. Nobody has ever asked you these questions.
So it's an alternating shock. So
Yeah. So what? Let it be alternating. Can you use alternating shock or not? Yes or no? Tell me.
Or the
That can cause fibrillation of the heart, alternating current.
If you have fibrillation, you give another shock.
More damage.
Anybody has any answer? AC shock can be given or not? Okay, I'll come to that a little later. There are so many types of current.
We want a
yes.
sustained current, sir. That's why
Yeah.
the DC shock gives a sustained current compared to.
No, that's not correct. See, the currents are a
AC shock, no, sir.
Huh? I'll come to that in a point. There are different types of currents. The two currents that we know of is a DC current, means current flows in one direction only, that is at a constant voltage or at a constant flow of energy in one direction only. The alternating current flows in one direction for a certain length of time and flows in the opposite direction for the next equal length of. So this one cycle of alternating current is this one. Okay, you have one, you can call this a positive phase or upward phase, one downward phase, and the minimum length of a cycle of an alternating current cannot be less than 200 milliseconds, because you have to flow current one way and flow the other way less than 200 milliseconds. Now there are other types of currents also, which is neither positive nor negative, which varies from time to time, called a variable current. The others are pulsating. There are different types of current. We won't talk. We only talk of direct and indirect. Now, defibrillation can be done by alternating current as well as by direct current. In fact, when defibrillators are first developed in historically, all the defibrillators have only alternating AC current only. In fact, AC current is more effective in defibrillation than DC current. It has got much more energy, but it is not used for some reason. The reason is it delivers much more energy in a single cycle than it. Now, the advantage of DC current is you can give DC current for 10 milliseconds, you can give it for 20 milliseconds, you can give it for 40 milliseconds, you can time it. So you can reduce the length of the current to as low as just 20 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds. So you restrict the amount of energy flowing into the heart. So if you reduce the amount of energy flowing into the heart, you will depolarize the heart, but you won't cause myocardial injury. Whereas in an alternating current, the minimum duration is 1 cycle. If you initiate alternating current, the minimum you can give is one cycle. And 1 cycle means 200 milliseconds. Now 200 milliseconds is 10 times more than the energy in a DC current. Therefore, it causes a lot more myocardial damage. So we never use AC shock nowadays. It has a longer pulse duration, it has more energy, it's more effective actually, but in converting defibrillation, but it causes much more severe myocardial injury. The other advantage is AC defibrillators are not portable. No, you can't carry it from one room to another. Whereas the DC shock is battery based, so you can easily carry it from one place to another. But all ambulatory defibrillators are DC shock. You can carry it in your ambulance. So that's the reason why we no longer have AC defibrillator. We only have DC defibrillators. Now I told you DC current can give one-way current, and it gives only for about 20 milliseconds. And therefore, sometimes the 20 milliseconds it may not depolarize the heart. Therefore, a DC current is not as effective as a AC current. AC current is much more effective but more damaging. Therefore, people tried different forms of DC current. So we have a DC current which can be given in one direction, and we have a DC current which can be given in two directions. That is, now watch this. This is a monophasic current. The current always flows from negative to positive. Can you see that? So it goes. That is a recurrent monophasic current. Monophasic DC current. Now, if you want to make it a biphasic current, you change the direction every cycle. Look what happens now. It goes like this, the next cycle is changing in the direction. Therefore, here you have a impulse in one direction, and you have 20 milliseconds current in one direction and 20 millisecond flow in another direction. The advantage is, if the cardiac tissue has not been depolarized here, it would be depolarized here. Yes, the entire heart has to be depolarized. That's what it is. Therefore, yeah. Now it doesn't depolarize in the first wave of current. It depolarize in the second wave. Now this is still much less than the AC current. AC current is 200 milliseconds, whereas this is total of only 40 milliseconds. So biphasic. A biphasic is always much more effective than a monophasic, and much more effective and much more safer than an alternating current. So why only biphasic? You can go on to triphasic also. If you make it triphasic, it's even more. 10 to 15 millisecond, 10 to 15 millisecond, 10 to 15 millisecond. Total 50 millisecond, you get 3 cycles. So it's even more effective, but this makes the machine very complicated. Therefore, most modern defibrillators are biphasic. The advantage of biphasic is it's much more effective and in defibrillation than monophasic. It is much more safer, less myocardial injury. It also requires less energy for defibrillation, because the first impulse, although it doesn't defibrillate, it sensitizes the myocardium. Therefore, the sensitivity threshold for defibrillation actually becomes low here, and the next shock effectively defibrillates it. So this sensitizes the heart and this defibrillates the heart. So most of the modern ones are biphasic ones, but still many older ones are monophasic ones. All automatic defibrillators in the airports and railway stations are biphasic. Okay. So now just watch here how they are putting, how they don't interrupt cardiac massage when they do, and how they do difference. Just watch this. This is a Medscape video again. Massage is continuing, and look that the other person will come and put the electrodes. Well, this is a attaching electrode, but we have manual electrode. Now the massage is still continuing. He doesn't stop. connecting the monitor defibrillator. Okay, that's all. I didn't show the entire process. So then he charges, he does, and everybody is ready. When he says clear, then only this massaging person takes the hand off. Okay, well, a few words about cardioversion. How is cardioversion different from defibrillation?
Cardioversion is
The cardioversion is synchronized to the R wave.
Okay, in what conditions is it used?
Whenever there is a regular rhythm like VF, atrial fibrillation, whenever there is clear-cut, well-formed QRS complex, there it can be used, sir.
Like, what is the example you said?
VT.
But did you say VF?
No, VF, we have to use defibrillation, sir.
Yes, okay. So,
I told AF for cardioversion.
Okay. So, any rhythm which has a clearly identified ECG R wave can be better done with cardioversion. Wherever there is no identifiable R wave, you do defibrillation. But what is the difference? Why do you want to do cardioversion and defibrillation? Why do you want to complicate it?
Because if we give the shock during the vulnerable period, that is over the downslope of the T wave, then the then VT may degenerate into ventricular fibrillation.
Downslope of T wave?
Vulnerable period, yes.
When is a vulnerable period? That's what I want to know.
Vulnerable period is downslope of T wave.
No.
Previously, actually, upslope they were telling. Now,
vulnerable period is no. I think the entire period is vulnerable, right from the late part of ST segment to the upslope and downslope. The entire period is considered vulnerable. Yeah, I agree. The T wave is the most vulnerable part, but you have to say late ST and the T wave both.
Okay, sir.
And how do you do synchronization?
By pressing the sync button in the defibrillation machine, sir.
Oh, come on! If you tell me the principle behind, I know to press the button. No? You're telling me that. Tell me the principle behind.
Principle: we have to give the shock synchronous to the peak of the R wave.
Okay. So what does the synchronization button do? What does it do?
Sir, it will sync. It will based on the previous cycles. It will deliver the shock at the predicted peak of the R wave based on the previous recorded cycles. Yeah.
So it shows you it senses each R wave and gives a signal indicating that it sensed the R wave. So these dots are the indicator that the synchronization is on. Now, when you press the defibrillator button, normally it would immediately deliver the shock. But if you are using synchronization, it will wait till an R wave comes and then give the shock. So it's important that you keep the paddle continuously on the chest. Don't take it off immediately. Don't press the button and immediately take it off. Okay, that is cardioversion. Otherwise, it's the same as defibrillation. Cardioversions in general you use much less joules energy than defibrillation. Defibrillation is in the range of 200 to 360, whereas cardioversion could be anywhere from 40 to 100, 120 up to 200. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Right. Quickly, a few words.
Sir, when regarding that case, when we were telling VF patient, if the patient is in VF, we have to give synchronized shock. I told you, is that during CPR?
No, the synchronized is wrong.
No, so it need not have to be synchronized, sir. If the patient is in VT. Patient is in VT cardiac arrest.
In the cardiac arrest situation, you don't fight for synchronization. You just go ahead and defibrillate.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, when there is no output, it's the same as VF.
Okay, sir.
Sir, one more doubt.
The worst thing that can happen is he will have a VF again. The treatment is in fact, you don't remove the paddle till you're sure the rhythm has returned to normal. If he has VF, you just give another shock. Yes.
Sir, whether when we are charging the paddles, some people tell, sir, that it should not be charged in the air. You have to keep on the surface and then charge. Is it surface of the chest and then only charge? Is it, sir, or nothing like that?
No, there's nothing like that. No.
Oh, okay, sir.
No. Okay, now we go to a different situation because we're running out of time. Okay, what do you do with a narrow Curus tachycardia in the ER room? Quickly, quick, don't waste time now, please. These are all things we have already discussed. Approach, management, quickly.
Sir, carotid sinus
Yes,
massage.
sir. Regular. No, whether it's regular or
Hemodynamically
irregular.
stable or
No,
unstable?
your diagnosed SVT, come on. Management.
Hemodynamically
Okay.
stable.
Hemodynamic is stable and unstable.
Yeah, stable.
Carotid sinus massage. First, we have to look for response to that. If it does not respond, then we have to go for adenosine.
Okay, that's exactly what I don't want you to answer. I told you, yes. Please, you are discussing a demonstration of a procedure in the examination and is a real life situation in the ER room. What do you do in the ER room? You have to connect a monitor, instruct the nurse access, explain to the patient what is the problem. Don't you do this?
Yes, sir.
Yes. And you have to put the patient in supine position first of all. Many of ER room patients are in the sitting position. And then you do vagal maneuvers, not before that. Okay, now there are many vagal maneuvers you can do and you must know how to do all of this. There are some maneuvers which the patient himself can do, some maneuvers only you can do. Okay. Gag reflex, do you know how to do gag reflex? What is gag reflex? What happened? Am I audible or no?
Yes, sir, audible, sir. So gag reflex is stimulating the posterior wall of the pharynx.
And trying to induce vomiting. That's all, no? Put your finger in the throat as if you're inducing vomiting. That is gag reflex. They gag on your finger, they gag on any foreign body. So, stimulate the posterior pharynx or posterior part of the tongue to induce vomiting. This is one of the simplest one. This is in fact, this is not reflex. We teach the patient when they go home. Patients with SVT, when they go home, we teach them, if you get palpitation, put your finger in your throat and try to vomit. This is the simplest one you can do. When the patient is getting, nurse has gone to get a monitor and get a IV line, a cannula, the patient can do gag reflex himself quickly. Valsalva, will come to that later. Intense cough can also break the tachycardia because that's also a form of, Valsalva. When you cough, you are raising the intrathoracic pressure and then the intrathoracic pressure suddenly drops. Of course, carotid massage and ice packs are generally done by the medical personnel. We'll come to carotid massage later. What is ice pack method?
Applying cold ice pack over the
Ice cube on the.
One person. Any
Yes,
one person.
we put.
Some other person can answer this time. No problem.
Yes, sir. We put ice cubes, ice packs, sir, on the eyes of the infant, sir. Of the pediatric, we do, sir. Pediatric population.
You put ice cubes on the baby's face.
No, not ice cubes, sir. Ice packs on the eyes, sir. Eyes of the pediatric patients. Sir.
Eyes of the pediatric patient. Eyes. No, where do you put the eyes? I'm asking. Cold eyes.
Ice we put on the eyes. Yes, sir. Cold ice we put on the eyes, sir. Vision.
Oh, come on! You'll put eyes on the eyes of the patient. Oh, he'll kick you and go to the new hospital. If somebody puts eyes on my eyes, I'll wait for that person to come out of the hospital and take my revenge. Come on, where do you put eyes? You put it on the face.
Over the face.
You put an ice cold towel on the face. You put an ice cold pack on the face. Most hospitals don't have ice pack and all. How many hospitals have ice pack and all? But they always have ice in the refrigerator. Get a towel, dip it in ice cold water, put the ice cold towel on the face. That's what we do in a very quick practical solution. suppose if you have a ice pack, there are ice packs available, no, in Amazon and all, it's available. And if it is readily cold available, you can put it. Another way to do it is, if some ICUs, they keep saline bottles in the fridge. Take the the flexible saline bag, wrap it in a handkerchief and put it on the face. So the idea is to apply extremely cold temperature to the face. So how does it work?
Raising the vagal tone.
Yeah, but you mean the vagus is coming to the face? Vagus is supplying the face? As far as I know, the vagus doesn't supply the face. Use your common sense, man. It's a reflex. The afferent limb is the trigeminal nerve. Efferent limb from the midbrain, from the brainstem, is the vagus. Use your common sense, no? Not a very difficult question. So the afferent limb of the reflex is from the trigeminal nerve, facial nerve, and it stimulates the medulla oblongata, and from there the vagus gets stimulated, and then central inhibition of the central increase in the vagal tone causes the heart to slow down. How was it detected? Any idea? Just a bit of common knowledge.
Sir,
when people used to dive into cold ocean, they used to faint. What is it called?
Diving reflex.
Not diving, it's just called dive reflex. It's called dive reflex. When extreme cold is applied to the trigeminal area, it stimulates the vagus and causes bradycardia. It's a dive reflex. It's a well-known effect of cold water. It's very effective in children and babies, not so effective in adults. Okay, ice pack. The next one is carotid. Once you are done vagal nerve, then only you go to drugs and all that. Okay. Now, how do you do carotid massage? This you must know. They may ask you to demonstrate. Quick, come on.
So first we should auscultate the carotids.
Yes. For what? Why?
The atherosclerosis and
everybody will have atherosclerosis. You think at 60 years they won't have atherosclerosis?
Brewing.
Look for carotid bruit.
Yeah. If there is a bruit, then there is a risk of thromboembolism. Okay, agreed. Go on.
Then recent history of transient ischemic attack or stroke.
Okay.
Within 6 months, that should be ruled out. After that, we have to consider the patient for carotid sinus massage in supine position. One side at a time. One side only should be done, not both the sides.
Okay. So how do you find the carotid?
Palpating.
Palpating where? Where?
Underneath the angle of the lower body.
Lower bottom of the? So we are having controversy even in the location.
carotid triangle.
Medial to sternocleidomastoid at the upper border of the thyroid cartilage.
Very
the level
good.
of upper border.
See, you should not have any controversies on location of carotid, man. It's one of the most stable structures in the body. So yes, upper border of the thyroid cartilage is in medial to the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Correct, that's the right answer. Okay, quickly you should go through the checklist before you do carotid massage. The indications should be there. There should be an indication. It's not a very simple procedure, it's not a safe procedure in elderly people. So you have them. So it is used in supraventricular tachycardia for diagnosis. You understand how it is used for diagnosis?
Carotid hypersensitivity response.
I'm talking of supraventricular tachycardia. Don't talk of
To distinguish
Distinguish?
If it responds, it says.
To distinguish SVT from
If
VT.
tachycardia abruptly stops, it is suggested.
We can use it to differentiate SVT from VT. We can also use it to differentiate SVT from atrial flutter. When you have a long pause and you see flutter waves, you can diagnose atrial flutter. So you can use it for diagnosis of SVT. You can use it for treatment of SVT to break the SVT, and of course it's used in the workup of syncopal episodes to see for long pauses. Look for any evidence of carotid disease or history of carotid disease. It should never be done in the sitting or standing position. It should be done in the supine or semi-recumbent position. It's always done with a monitor connected. Never do without a monitor. And ideally you should have an access to intravenous route. The site is the carotid bifurcation. You locate the carotid bifurcation by the upper border of thyroid cartilage. From the upper border of thyroid cartilage, go laterally. But before you reach the sternocleidomastoid muscle, you will feel the carotid pulse. The duration of massage is not more than 5 to 10 seconds on one side. There's no use doing it beyond 10 seconds. And you should stop it as soon as you see a change in the heart rate. Now, although we call it massage, actually what you really need is just compression. It's not really a massage which is necessary. I know many people do massages. They do round and round and round. And some people do up and down and all that. But what you really need is compression. The pressure receptors have to be stimulated by compression. But if you do a massage, you please do it in up and down direction. At least you stay on the carotid. When you do round and round, what happens is you are on the carotid and then you go out of the carotid. Then you come back to the carotid, you go out of the carotid. So don't do round and round massage, please. Either do just flat compression or you do gentle up and down movement. Up and down means along the length of the carotid with just 2 or 3 fingers. And stop as soon as the heart rate changes. Okay, there is a short video here just to show you how it is done. Patient is in supine, ECG is connected, and the patient has an IV access. He has already been explained what we are going to do, because otherwise the moment you press, he will start becoming restless. And then this most prominent cartilage is the thyroid cartilage. So, sorry, one moment. So from the upper border of the thyroid, come laterally and then you press it. Look at the way he is pressing there. Okay, you press there and keep pressure maintained 5 to 10 seconds, or you can massage up and down. He's pressing now, and up and down along the length of the carotid. That's the way carotid massage is done. Okay, next is Valsalva maneuver. Demonstrate. How do you do Valsalva maneuver? How will you do in the exam if you are asked?
Keep a hand on the abdomen, sir, and ask
one person. Any one person. Yeah, keep a hand on the
methods we can do, sir.
Yeah. Which one will you do?
Ask him to. Yes, sir. Ask him to give a force against the hands.
Against?
The hand, sir.
Force against the hand. Oh, okay. Raise his abdomen, you mean?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I thought Valsalva has something to do with breathing, no? You
are blowing into sphygmomanometer, sir. That tube, rubber tubing, or into a bottle, empty bottle also.
Anybody else? Well, okay, we'll say, I will go ahead. So there are many methods of doing Valsalva maneuver. All of them are right. There's nothing wrong about any of these methods. There are people who just ask to close your mouth and close your nose and try to blow hard. The other people who just ask the patient to put their own thumb into the mouth and close it tightly, close the nose and blow hard. You can give them a syringe and ask them to blow into the syringe. It's not very easy to blow the syringe open. Ask them to blow tightly and try to blow into the syringe. You can take the tube out of the manometer and ask them to blow into the manometer. Yeah. Or You know this weightlifting posture? Or you can even say when you strain for defecation, it's also a Valsalva maneuver. So this is also a Valsalva maneuver. But this posture is not recommended because you can't auscultate and you can't look for changes in the blood pressure and all this position. It's not common. So one of these 4 methods is just okay. The important thing is how much to do it. The idea of Valsalva is to raise the intrathoracic pressure and therefore reduce the venous return. Now, venous return occurs at a pressure of only 10 millimeters of mercury or maybe 10-15 centimeters of water. Therefore, you don't have to raise the intrathoracic pressure to very, very high levels, like 120 and all that. Absolutely no need. Just enough if you can raise it to moderate level, maybe about 30 or 35 millimeters of mercury in the manometer. Otherwise, just ask them to strain on a finger to the maximum level and then reduce it to half. Half of the maximum is quite good enough. But it's important they maintain it for about 10 seconds so that the venous return is reduced and you see the effect on the heart. So the level is important and the duration is important. The method is immaterial how you do it. Understood? Any one of these methods is okay. You can do it with a manometer, you can do it with the thumb in the mouth, you can do it with a closed nose and thing, glue it with a syringe. Any one of these methods is fine. Or blowing into a hard balloon is also okay. Okay? So this is of course, when you are doing Valsalva maneuver, you always look for certain things. Look for the murmur if you are doing for HOCM. Look for the blood pressure and heart rate if you are doing for other hemodynamic. So if you are doing for hemodynamic, this is the record which comes here. I hope all of you are familiar with the phases of Valsalva. I don't have time to go into the detail, but can you quickly interpret what this is? What response is it?
Sir, there is absence of phase 4 overshoot, sir.
Where is phase 4 here? Which is phase 4? I'll show you. This is phase 1, a short rise, and then a prolonged fall in blood pressure is phase 2. A transient dip is phase 3, and this is phase 4. So you're saying there is no overshoot of blood pressure in the first phase 4?
Oh, sorry, sir. Sorry, sir.
No, you can't afford to say sorry. You're going up for exam. So what response is this?
So this is sinusoidal response.
This is normal response.
What sinusoidal response? What is sinusoidal response?
So this is normal response, no?
Yeah, this is a normal response to Valsalva. Phase 1, a short temporary rise. Phase 2, prolonged fall in blood pressure. Phase 3, a transient dip, and then rebound hypertension. Hypertension is there because the blood pressure is going above the basal level. Basal level is here. Yes? There is rebound hypertension or not?
Yes, sir.
So this is a normal response. What is this? What do you see here?
Absence of phase 4 overshoot.
Okay, yes. Here the phase 4 is not going above the basal level. The basal level is here and the phase 4 is also staying at the same level. So what does it indicate?
LV dysfunction.
Heart failure.
No.
Heart failures.
No.
Autonomic dysfunction, sir.
Autonomic neuropathy, autonomic dysfunction.
Okay, it basically indicates that the heart is unable to increase its cardiac output in response to increased venous return. That's what it means. That means heart is unable to respond to increased venous flow, venous return. Normally when venous return increases, heart has to increase its output. In this case, it's not able to do. This can happen in a number of conditions. This can happen due to autonomic disturbance because returning blood causes distension of the atrium and sympathetic stimulation. If it happens, it can happen. It happens in fixed output situations like idiopathic pulmonary hypertension. Idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, when the venous return increases, the heart cannot increase its output because the pulmonary vascular resistance does not allow it to increase the output. So it will remain fixed. If there is any valvular obstruction, it will not allow the cardiac output to increase with increased venous return. Like aortic stenosis, it will not allow an increase in the production. And of course, heart failure, again, it will not allow the increase in the output. So therefore, this is a very non-specific response which is seen in a number of conditions where the heart is unable to increase its output in response to increased venous return. So this is a absence of phase 4. Now cardiac failure, what pattern do you see? One is absence of phase 4 can be seen in cardiac failure. Any other, this is lack of rebound rise in phase 4, indicates a fixed cardiac output. Okay, when you do in heart failure, what do you get?
Square wave response.
What is that? What is that?
There won't be decrease in the second stage.
I can't hear you, please. I can't hear you.
There won't be decrease. There won't be decrease in the blood pressure in second stage of Valsalva, sir.
No. Okay, there won't be decrease of what? Blood pressure or heart rate? Okay, I'll tell you.
Blood pressure, sir.
Okay, yeah, I'll tell you. There are 3 types of responses described in a heart failure situation. One is our absence of overshoot. The phase 4 remains at the same phase as basal. Other one is the sinusoidal phase. That none of the fall is also not very characteristic, and the rebound also is not very characteristic. Okay, so that some people call it a sinusoidal response. The other one is a square wave phase. Normally you expect the BP to fall during the second phase. In heart failure, sometimes it increases during the second phase. This is what is a square pulse. It increases and then stays high and then comes down. It's a function of increased sympathetic drive in heart failure. Okay. So Valsalva, and of course Valsalva is used in HOCM. So Valsalva can be used in HOCM, it can be used in heart failure, it can be used in fixed cardiac output situations. And a method I have told you how to do it. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, and finally, suppose the patient does Valsalva in the ER room for tachycardia and it doesn't work. Then what do? All the vagal maneuvers fail. What do you do?
Medicines.
Medicines. Oh, what medicine? For narrow-current tachycardia. Hey, why do you take that long? Adenosine, no? What is the problem? You don't give adenosine?
Adenosine, yes.
Okay. So, either you give adenosine alone, or the other maneuver is you give the adenosine, immediately do a vagal maneuver, so that you have the additive effect of both. Give adenosine in appropriate dose, of course. Dose is 3 milligram, 6 milligram, 12 milligram, whatever you give the full doses, and immediately do a vagal maneuver. That is one trick you can try. The other trick, of course, is to go on to other drugs, verapamil in older patient and beta blockers and all that. You can go on try. The other trick you can do is, if you are in the cath lab, you can induce an ectopic, or you can do pacing if you have a pacemaker lead. Yeah. And of course, if the patient is unstable, you can do DC cardioversion, synchronized DC cardioversion. Okay. This is very easy. We are all used to it, and of course, we have done it in a hospital. But suppose you are in a place where none of these are available. Adenosine is available, it didn't work. You have done vagal maneuver, it didn't work. You don't want to give verapamil because you don't have resuscitation equipment there, and you don't have facilities for pacing, ectopics, cardioversion. Either or cardioversion and pacing, it will take 1 hour to mobilize. What will you do?
Pain.
BBC, sir, which stop the.
And I can't hear you.
Chest thrust.
Thump on the chest.
Yes, sir.
Thump on the chest is used only in cardiac arrest situation. No? Awake patient with SVT, if you thump, no, he will thump you back.
So painful stimulation.
No. So please don't say thump. Thump many people don't like. It's only in the cardiac arrest situation if you don't have a defibrillator on hand. That too, that is out of hospital cardiac arrest. You can use cardiac thump. Awake patient, SVT and all, please never attempt a thump. And painful stimulus, no, that's not the answer. There is something called augmented Valsalva maneuver. Have you heard of it? Modified or augmented Valsalva maneuver. Tell me how Valsalva works in SVT. Why does Valsalva maneuver work in SVT?
It stimulates the vagal nerve, so it increases the vagal tone.
This is vagal tone is a very easy answer. Everybody will tell you. You tell me how it increases vagal tone.
Okay. Sir, there will be increase in the venous return phase 2. Sir, there will be positive intrathoracic pressure.
I can't hear it, Baba. I can't hear your answer. How does Valsalva break SVT? How does it increase vagal tone? I know it reduces venous return.
Sir, during Valsalva maneuver, the positive intrathoracic pressure, it will decrease the venous return. So as a result of which the cardiac output, as a result of which the decrease in the venous return, the BP falls. With that, the baroreceptors get stimulated, thereby causing
when BP falls, which gets stimulated, sympathetic or parasympathetic?
BP falls sympathetic.
So the tachycardia will increase. The tachycardia will become even faster.
Yeah.
You should think before you answer.
Phase 4 Valsalva, sir.
Yes.
Release phase.
It is not the stage. It is not the stage 2 which breaks the tachycardia. It is the stage 4. When there is increased venous return and hypertension, the vagus is stimulated. Understood?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
It is only in phase 4 when the blood pressure goes up due to increased venous return that the vagus is stimulated and the tachycardia, Now, what is augmented Valsalva failure? What you do Valsalva, and during the phase 4, you do something to increase the venous return even more. How do you do that? How do you increase venous return in the patient?
Leg raising. Passive leg raising.
Huh?
Sir.
Sorry?
Sir, passive leg raising.
Okay, in this case, it's not passive leg raising. You tilt the whole patient head up, head down. This is how it is done.
Result from search.
So, what you do is, first you do in a sitting, first explain everything to the patient, otherwise he will get very, very upset. What you do is, in a sitting position, ask him to do Valsalva maneuver, and the moment he goes into phase 4, the tachycardia has not become, you suddenly tilt the whole patient down. In fact, you do go even down, put the head down and the legs up. in phase 4. When he is reaching phase 4, you tilt the patient suddenly it into leg up, body down, head down position. And it is done very, very abruptly. So that along with the venous return in phase 4 increasing, the gravity also helps to return the venous blood in a rush towards the chest. So that both together, Valsalva plus gravity, will stimulate the vagus. So a augmented Valsalva maneuver much more effective than a simple Valsalva maneuver in breaking SVT. In fact, you should have read, no? There was a trial conducted on this. Have you heard of the REVERT trial? This maneuver was actually tried as a method of treating SVT, even without giving adenosine in the casualty room. All you do is you do Valsalva, immediately tilt the patient head down, legs up. Please go and read REVERT trial. So this is called modified Valsalva maneuver or augmented Valsalva maneuver. It is more effective than a simple Valsalva maneuver. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir.
Finally, isometric hand grip test. How do you do that? I already discussed with you once. I already discussed with you once this one.
Squeeze the fingers.
Okay. Now there is an instrument called hand grip, whatever this machine is called, dynamometer, where you can clench it and pull together, and you can calibrate how much you are pulling. You can judge your strength here. This is a dynamometer, but most hospitals will not have a dynamometer. Therefore, we can use anything to use hand grip. Either you can grip your doctor's 2 fingers, he can have a tennis ball in his hand, you can roll up a BP cuff, inflate it partly and ask him to squeeze the cuff, what it is. Most important thing is, it is not necessary for him to squeeze 100% of his power to get the effect. Because it's more important that he sustains it for 10 to 15 seconds for the hemodynamic effect to come. Therefore, what you do is ask him to just show what his maximum power is. First you judge how much maximum power. Suppose he can squeeze up to 50. Then you ask him to squeeze only about 50 to 60% of that. Or this fellow says 70 to 100%, but I don't think even that necessary. Even 50 to 60% of maximum is sufficient, but he should maintain it for 15 to 30 seconds. That is more important. It is not necessary for to squeeze very, very hard. If you do moderate squeezing, maintained for about 20 to 30 seconds is important. You can use both hand grip test also. And during the squeezing, it's recommended that you continuously monitor the ECG, because in elderly patients, again, this is a stressful test for them. And then, of course, you do your observation, whether you're auscultating for murmur, or whether you're looking at the response on LV function and whatever, or you're looking at the response to AR, whatever it is, you can do it. But the idea is to squeeze to maximum and do it at a fraction of the maximum and maintain it for 20 to 30 seconds. And during the 20 seconds, you do your observations. Third for isometric hand grip exercise. I think I'll stop here. It's already 4 o'clock. So I've tried to teach you many of the procedures that we do in the clinic and in the bedside. And hopefully they will ask you to demonstrate one of these in your examination. Please read up the little bit of theory of these things, especially CPR, because CPR is something, which everybody should know, and everybody should do it properly. And if you don't do it properly, it definitely creates a very, very bad impression. I think you should read about CPR and read about all the procedures, do it. Now, I think this is probably my last class before your practical exam. I think we are stopping classes after this. So I wish all of you a very, very successful go at the examination. I'm sure all of you will do well. But exam is only one step, that is not the final step. The real step is how you practice cardiology in your life. Okay? The exam will be over one day very quickly, if not this month, within a few months. That's not the big thing. So make use of your knowledge in a good way. And thank you, all of you, for attending my class. And I wish you all a very, very successful examination. I'm sure you'll do well. All the best. Now, if you have any doubts, I'll be very happy to answer the doubts.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. One moment.
Thank you.
If anybody has doubts, I have to. Okay, I see 4 hands up for ACLS or BLS training, whatever it is. So not many people have done ACLS, BCLS, I think. I don't know, anybody else has put up hands? So I see only a total of 4 hands have gone up for ACLS, BCLS, I think. Oh, now it has become 6 hands. 2 more have put up. 7. Okay. You guys are putting up only now. Okay. Anyway, right. Any doubts on the procedures? I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, it'll be bye-bye and good luck for your exam.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Hope
sir.
to meet you, sir, in future. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot,
People who are not going up for the examination will meet again. We're not going up for the exam, we'll meet again whenever the classes resume. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, sir.